Sorry, what?
Thank you. All right, so now we get into some more of the tooling that we have that is provided by Erlang and Elixir around how to build more specific function calls and how to get more expressive power out of Elixir. We can use threads for spoilers. Clever. So pattern matching is interesting because it uses the equal operator. And so while the first line is obviously an assignment, it actually is also doing pattern matching, which is sometimes a little confusing. Especially, well, it's in the beginning when you first look at it, I think this might be the most confusing slide that you have overall. So the first line is a equals 5. What this actually does is say, well, does a match 5? And then if it's undefined, it won't care. And because it's ordered this way, it's actually going to assign 5 to a. The second line is checking whether a matches 5. And this will give you an error if it's not true.
Will it give you an error or just false?
It will give you an error. It will say that it can't actually match.
Okay.
It is a pattern matching error. The third line is saying, I would like to really just check whether the value inside of a matches the right side. So this will not assign 6 to a. Whatever a is, it will keep its value. And if that value happens to not be 6, you're going to get a matching error.
Is it somehow different than like double equals?
Double equals is just an equality operator. It will not do any assignments. But you can use that same caret if you want to sort of get the value out of the variable. This is valuable in things like macros and things like that, where it's not quite clear what's going to happen. The caret is a way of sort of pinning it and saying, do not touch what's this variable. You don't use the caret a whole lot, but it comes in handy sometimes if you're going to use a variable you assigned earlier as the left-hand side for destructuring. And you'll see a concrete example for it later.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I had to do something very contrived here to show how it works, right? The next 3 are a slightly better example, and you're going to see, yes?
I was going to say, the biggest difference between that and the double equals is that pattern matching can assign for double and give errors.
Yeah.
The double equals is just going to be true or false.
Yes.
Oh, I see. So yeah, double equals returns true, the other one returns false.
Yeah. Thank you. You're going to see this pattern more when we get into servers and passing messages from process to process. Having a tuple that begins with OK or something else, and then having a value on the other side of the tuple. And so this is a way you could actually pattern match on the return value. Again, there will be actual concrete examples that make sense, that follow this, and don't look very, very silly. But I'm trying to limit the amount of knowledge on this one slide, because it's a weird one. So you can do pattern matching in functions as well, and you can define functions multiple times. In this example, you'll see here my naming conventions for examples are fantastic. We have foo and bar. So we can actually define bar with 1 and do either just output things, or bar with 2, or bar with a default value. So what this means is that if you do foo.bar and pass 1, you're going to actually call the first function. Foo.bar with 2 will call the second function. And foo.bar with anything else will fall down to the third one. So if the last function, bar with x, is not defined, what do you think will happen if you call foo.bar and pass 3? Some kind of error, yes. It's going to say that there's no such function, yeah.
There'd be a compiler? Like, there'd be a compiler error.
This is not a compiler error, no. Because everything is, this is all runtime, and you might be getting data from another system, so you have no way of knowing ahead of time whether this will work or not. This, offhand, this will probably seem kind of scary, like you have this gigantic hole in the way your system works. But the way you work with Elixir and Erlang is that you think about everything as self-contained units of work inside processes that are just separate from everything else. So if anything throws an error, there's probably a really good reason why it is throwing the error, and you want that to die, and then you want the rest of the system to keep working.
So the compiler's not going to force an exhaustive list.
Correct. There is a tool that we're not getting into today because the error messages are inscrutable, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would have shown it to you. It is called Dialyzer, and it allows you to have optimistic type checking, and it will give you warnings like, are you aware that this function is not going to work for every case?
Can you do like non-static pattern matching needs? Like if we wanted to implement like Fizzbuzz or something silly like that, and you say mod 3 for the first one and mod 5 for the second one, and that literally the next.
Oh, it's almost the next one, I forgot. You can do this with anonymous functions as well. This looks kind of strange, but because it's anonymous, you can define it only once. So the way this works is you open anonymous, and then you say, all right, if it receives this input, do this input, do that, and so forth. And this is not limited to one line. You could have multiple lines after the 1, multiple lines after the 2, right? It's kind of like a switch case. But it is literally defining a function that in the compiler will route properly, right? Like you're not really getting rid of the if statement, it's just at the compiler level now, right? So you don't have to do it in your code.
Is that defining a function called function?
Yes. Forgive me.
Function is not a reserved word.
It is not a reserved word.
And on the previous example, you said def bar, you have to repeat that def bar part. Is there a way to do a named function that looks more like this?
No. If you have a named function, it is going to look like this, and they're going to be just separate lines this way. The closest you can get, yes?
I was going to say, the reason for that is that the def module and def bar are all macros.
Yeah.
Can you define macro and why, not why we hate them, but at least understand what you do better?
At the most fundamental level, the simplest, not the best, but the simplest description of a macro is it lets you define a way with code to write additional code very simply. In practice, what you're doing is modifying the abstract syntax tree and essentially replacing bits of the tree with other elements. If you don't know what an abstract syntax tree is, raise your hand. Okay, right. Yeah. All right.
Is it similar, like meta? Sounds like meta.
It is exactly metaprogramming.
Okay.
So there's a book. If you just Google Gigamonkeys, like Giga monkeys, I think that is Paul Graham's book on teaching Common Lisp. It is a very good book for learning Lisp, and I wish I could attribute this quote, but someone said every programmer should learn Lisp for 2 weeks, even if they never touch it again ever. Eric Raymond. Of course it was ESR. Of course it was him. Because it will fundamentally change the way you think about a lot of things. I remember going through that book 7 years ago and going, oh, this is just functions. I get this. Okay, you define this data structure over here. This is nice. And then chapter 8 comes around, and it's macros, and my head exploded. And I closed the book, and I said, I'm not ready for this. And now I am ready for this, but I still can't explain it, so it's a work in progress. Essentially, yes. This. Order will matter in the sense that
If you match one, it will work.
if you match one, it will just match the first one. It matches and then stop. So because this is anything, if you put that at the top, it's gonna always match that, and then of course you'll never get the other hits.
So they all have to have the same array?
Probably not.
Okay.
Because you can define, so here, to keep things simple, I'm defining bar with 1, bar with 2, and so forth. But I could define bar that taking a tuple even. I could define bar taking 2 elements with like a string and a number.
Next slide does it.
Right? Probably not. I think the next slide is the question that he asked, which
It
was,
does have different array.
Oh, okay.
have I already done it? No. It's 1, 2, and underscore.
Oh yeah, but I mean the next slide. Next slide has different arrays.
Oh, okay.
I'm so smart. Ta-da! Unfortunately, it means I'm wrong yet again because your question is not quite answered yet.
That's
But
all right. Next slide.
we,
I believe in you.
I'm so glad I gave you all the slides. You know everything. This is great. Yeah, I consider that the slides I put up here are sort of a snapshot of what's happening, and you have all the control you want to drive your own learning. All right, raise your hand if you have no idea what recursion is. Cool. Raise your hand if this looks like garbage, or if it's inscrutable. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go through it, and it's not going to be very long. And, well, there's a reason why I put it in this order, even though it's not what you would do if you were a good programmer. So the idea is actually to re-implement the reduction function that we used earlier. So you're going to get a list here. So what you can do is call foo.recurse and pass a list of numbers. You can actually pass a list of anything because this is Elixir, but you're trying to add things up here, so you're going to be really unhappy if there's no semigroup, basically. So you're going to call a function with the same name, recurse, this time 2 arguments. It's going to have a 0 and a list. So now we're going to go to the top of the module, and we're going to look for the next function that we can call. The next one is a function called recurse that takes an empty list and then something. Well, if this list is empty, we're going to do that, which is print out whatever the accumulator is, right? So that will be 0. But if the list is not empty, then that won't match. So we'll go to this one next. And this bit of magic over here is how you say, give me a list that is not empty, essentially that has a head and a tail. This will work for a list with only 1 element because the tail will be an empty list. So if we pass 1 and 2 here, we will go to this one. And then what we will do in this function is call recurse, pass the rest of the list into it, and then add the first element to the accumulator. So this will go and try to match something. So we'll go to recurse to the top. If the list is empty, we're done. If the list is not empty, we'll hit this again. So we'll basically go to this function recursively until we're done.
This is a sum.
Yes, this is sum.
So that fact that you're adding these classes on there, does it mean this won't work for any type of list?
That's correct. This will not work for strings, lists of strings, for instance. It will not work if you have a string with a number and a string with a list with a number and a string in it. No, this is bad code. I'm not going to pretend it's good code.
No, it's only because you said it.
It is possible to write this better, but I wanted to show this idea.
Does it blow the stack if you pass like 1 million thing in your list, or is it state of the line? makes engine on.
You know, I don't think I've ever tried to write bad recursion in Elixir. I don't know. I've never tried. I think it probably will blow up eventually.
So it's pretty fast. If I was playing with this, I tried something like that. I didn't build a stack. I just got moving pretty much numbers and it took a long time. I had to do like a recursive operation for like an hour.
Yeah.
So I was expecting to get a out of range error or something that didn't happen.
So maybe we'll just keep doing work forever, and you'll. You know, I actually wouldn't be surprised if it just did the work forever and ever, because that's not a problem in Elixir, right? Like because, and we'll get to this, but
Because I don't know if you will restart stuff.
well, no, because everything is a separate process, and if you're a halfway decent software developer or engineer, you're going to have monitoring on your production app, and you'll see that something is taking a lot of cycles, and then using all the toolkits developed by Erlang and OTP, you'll be able to go in, figure out which one is taking a lot of space, and say, you're going to die now. Just kill it. So how is this? I'm not going to ask you to implement recursion necessarily, but for all I know, you might. It is another tool in the tool belt, and it's a useful one.
Can you explain that pipe syntax a little more? The head pipe.
Don't, shh, bad computer. This? This is destructuring, yes. You see this in Haskell as well with the colon operator, right? The cons operator. This is something that you really only see for lists in Elixir, right? Like, this is the most common use case. I don't know of another one really. All it's doing is saying, assuming you have a list with data in it, I want to separate the first element from the rest of the list. Are you familiar? Well, do you know any Lisp at all? Any Haskell at all?
Very little.
Okay, all right, then never mind. Not getting into that, it would just be confusing. You have a question or?
No.
All right, you're just grinning. This is good. Grinning is good. It's better than tears. The tears will come later. And guard clauses, we finally have the question that you asked. I'm not lying. I refer to this page constantly. I haven't memorized all the things you can do with guard clauses. This is very powerful because it lets you say, I want to have a variable case for when this function gets called. So you can say, I want to call. I didn't put a name on those functions. I'm batting 1,000. It's okay. It's okay. If I close my eyes, it'll all go away. So this will get called if x is greater than 5. This will get called if x is less than 0. This will get called every other time. There are some. This is really, really nice, and it's also a little iffy because you get down to Erlang at this level. So if you open this page, you will find that a bunch of the operators and things you can check are things that you don't actually use in day-to-day Elixir work, other than right here. But you can do things like when this argument is a list, when this argument is a tuple, and so forth. So you could restrict things that way.
Pretty much any predicate.
There's a list. It's not exactly as open-ended as I wish it were, but it is. you. Mic check again. Mic check?
Yeah.
Cool. I know I did make you write recursive code. I'm just evil. I just lie all the time. Just don't trust me. And as always, if you have, either documentation or code or anything that's useful to everybody else, put it in the channel. You can talk to each other because you're grown people. And if you have questions, I might even be able to help you.
We should have put this. Is that a guide clause, I presume?
It is before the do. I should have put the do in there, yeah.
Okay, you put it in. Okay.
Yeah, when X, yes.
Oh, when, so.
Yeah. An Emacs question? That's my favorite kind of question.
So I have this in the buffer.
Yeah.
How can I just load it into the repos? Or?
That depends on the tools you have.
It's SpaceMac, but like in
I don't know SpaceMax.
Oh, okay.
So, do you know how to find help on the tools you have? Because, well, basically what you're looking for is, there's something in Emacs called comint, C-O-M-I-N-T, and that is basically how to send things to an interactive buffer or to another buffer. Mm-hmm. So you're looking for something like either Elixir, comment, send to buffer, or Alchemist, send to buffer.
Okay. Okay. I can try that.
You're staring at this like I wrote it incorrectly. Did I write it in?
X minus 1 plus X plus 2.
Of course I did.
It's X minus.
That's a minus! That's a minus! For the love of God! I can't even trust myself.
Yeah. But it's like, it's the... Oh, where?
N is n minus 1 plus n minus 2. Absolutely a minus sign. Definitely not a plus sign. Definitely not a plus sign.
Right. Right. Okay.
How do you do like
And I'm
the-
not sure that I think that negative less than 0 is undefined, or I think 0 returns 0 is the condition, but I could be wrong. You could start with...
So that, I've seen multiple rules on that.
Okay.
Everything, I've always known it to begin with n of 1.
Okay.
But whether it's n of 0 and n of 1 or n of 1 and n of 2, whatever.
Yeah.
Wikipedia says keep your definition.
See? I picked my definition. I got it wrong, but I picked my definition.
So okay.
So instead of putting it in there like that.
No, so it's def call x when x is less than 1. So you call x.
Before the do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry. I didn't check for the when you find a lunch, and it just crashed my.
What did you crash?
What did it crash? I don't know, but it just like because if I tried with screw, it just.
Oh, right. So you started an infinite loop.
Oh. So it's going back while then.
Right, and so with Control G, I just interrupted the. Well, so you got control back in Emacs, so now you should be able to interrupt that. Welcome to the fun of recursion.
What's up with the module?
This?
Number stuff.
This is the abstract syntax tree for it.
Oh. In what form?
Erlang. Well, this is, I mean, AST form for Erlang, like that double less than and then like those numbers.
Yeah.
That's ASCII. That's a Erlang car list.
Okay, so it's ASCII. Okay.
Yeah.
Why did they give it to me?
Well, I mean, that's what it's doing, right? It's compiling down to Erlang so you can run it.
Yeah. Fibonacci 100 is
Taking a while?
taking a little bit of time.
Well, it is.
Optimize it.
Yeah.
It's an exploding algorithm.
Yeah, I didn't say I was making you do a particularly clever algorithm.
So, here's the thing, is that if I make the call 0, return 0, it just works just fine, and I get a proper termination sequence. But if I say call 0 raises undefined, then I hit the I hit that, and the
What?
whole thing just explodes.
When would you ever hit 0? Actually, I know exactly when. When you call for f of Fibonacci of 2, you would hit 0 because you go -1 and -1.
Right. So since I can add 0 and it doesn't change the result
Right.
of my.
I mean, I would cheat and just define fib of 2 so you don't have the problem, but
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. That would work too.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm just very lazy.
All right. Yeah. Oh, okay. It's fine for the. Yeah. Okay. All right. We do it that way. Thank you.
Yep. No, right, microphone. All right, sanity check. How are we doing? There is one implementation in the channel that is pretty reasonable. We are hitting the half-an-hour mark, so we can choose to skip Fizzbuzz and take the next break, or we can just do Fizzbuzz. Who here is excited about implementing Fizzbuzz one more time in a new language? I know you're in there. Yeah.
So it's undefined. And I just get undefined. Oh, I don't know.
I don't know if that's a thing in
Oh,
Elixir. That's a thing in Haskell, but
so what are we doing with undefined?
oh, just you can return just a tuple or like a string or
Or a colon,
whatever.
or a, like
An atom.
A keyword or an atom.
Yeah.
Like atom colon error or something like that. Or you can just raise.
That's true. You can also just raise.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, so
Generally, raise. What are you doing? You're a bad programmer. That's what I do. I can't easily get to you. So what's your question?
how do you rate this?
Just raise and then, well,
Register. Yeah.
all right. Who is not ready to move on? Very fundamentally. Okay. A couple of people.
Are the, I guess, methods inside modules, are they read from the top down?
The
Kind of like Ruby?
the functions are read top down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because originally I had this first, and it was doing all sorts of.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Making sure.
Order matters.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I want to do.
So it's the week goes to quizzes.
Oh, I guess it's not. You're not looking at
Try to put the parens around the x.
This one?
The first one. Yeah. That's something I've never done because I'll always just put the parens around it. It's good to know that there's a problem with their Elixir.
Oh, so your accumulator is a bunch.
All right, for those of you who are done and bored, feel free to move on to Fizzbuzz. And we'll take a break after that. At this point, I expect myself to have written the rules for Fizzbuzz incorrectly, so yeah.
I'm working in a file. Like in the terminal, I can just, if I have an array, it'll print the array, but if I want to print an array or an app in a file,
io.inspect.
it's like,
According to the schedule, lunch is at 12 a.m. Does Boulder have Seamless? Because we can make something happen.
What is it? C?
Seamless. Seamless is a startup that basically lets lets you order food from restaurants and deliver them to wherever you are. Grubhub, they bought Seamless, so whatever, that'll work. I'm in New York City, so I'm a Seamless snob, I guess.
So, I might be jumping ahead, but how does method lookup, or I should say function lookup, work in Elixir? Like, can I import IO so I don't have to keep on typing IO.close?
You can do that. So the way it works is similar to Ruby in the sense that what you import will put everything there in the code when you compile, and then you override whatever underneath if you redefine it.
Okay.
But of course, override is a tricky thing, given that you can just redefine things with the same arity and such, or different arity. All right, so whose pride is on the line right now with the exercises? All right, your pride. Okay.
I haven't, no, I mean, I just put that quick.
Yeah.
Conveniently, whatever I installed in Atom is giving me help before I.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Oh, the modulo operator is not that. It is mod x, 3. It's mod parens.
Okay.
Yes. There's stuff like, there's just leftover bits from Erlang, like for instance, I think now there is something for list.length, but to get the length of the list, for a while it was still length parens the list.
Yeah.
Just there.
Yeah. It's weird because it's Ruby, it's very Ruby-like in many ways,
And then not, completely not, yeah. Basically, when you reach the Erlang wall, just everything about Ruby falls away because it just kind of has to work the way Erlang says. Really?
Use ren.
Oh, yes, thank you, remainder. It turns out you can't hold a programming language and a presentation in your head at the same time.
I had to Google it anyway. I was like, where's my mod operator?
It's so, I don't know why. I'm just amazed by whatever I installed in
It's just
my text editor. It's like helping me so much.
What is it? What is the text engine?
Atom.
Adam.
right. So that
Yeah, no, I installed some Elixir packages this
That's
morning.
pretty nice.
Yeah.
so this should work.
It's not a red squiggly, so
Right.
I'm assuming it will work, but it's giving me a warning.
Well,
So how, yeah, I was gonna say, how does it know? And then, okay, cool.
okay. How do you feel about skipping the next small break and just kind of going towards lunch at a reasonable pace?
Yeah. 19 minutes to 12
All right.
hours.
So everybody close your eyes, take a deep breath and let it out and pretend this was a 5-minute break. All right, 5-minute break. Combining functions. This is probably not as exciting as Haskell. Just fair warning. This is the reason why the object is the first argument, because of this pipeline operator. If you've done F#, it is very similar to it. F# is an additional one, which is the pipe back operator. I never understood how that one worked, but I also spent like 15 minutes on F#, so that's probably my fault more than F#'s.
No, that was
Okay, all right.
It just goes back, it goes backwards.
Right, yeah.
Right, it's just to remove
Oh, that's right. That's what that,
Yeah,
yes.
what do you use it for?
Got it. So, as you can tell, if you've done filter and map in the past 2 hours, they take 2 arguments, right? But the way it's written here, it seems to only take 1. The pipeline operator allows you to have one data structure and then send it through, and it will become the first argument of the functions that you call below. This, of course, is horribly contrived, but if you look at the source code for Phoenix, which is I don't like calling it the web framework because that makes you think of Rails, and it's just not Rails at all. But the web API tool that is garnering some interest, this technique is used a lot for the connection object that holds all the information about the current session and connection. In fact, all of the routes and so on basically take the connection object through a whole series of such transformations and pipelines to make sure that, among other things, you are logged in and you can access this page and things like that. And if you are wondering, because I said that, how does it stop? Then I wish I hadn't said that. There is a keyword for which I could not find a good non-contrived example to give you as an exercise, called the with keyword, which essentially implements railway programming. Raise your hand if you have no idea what railway programming is. All right. This is me just like digging myself a grave. Railway programming is the idea that you have to go through a series of steps, but any one of those steps returning some kind of error or failing should stop the complete pipeline. So essentially the way it works is you go through the steps and say, as long as this stuff is returned, we're okay. So you define the acceptable return. And if at any point it doesn't return what you defined, it will go to the else clause, which again, depending on what you got as an error, you can decide how to act. There is an example of that at the very, very end of the slides. If you're really impatient, you can take a look at it now, but I would suggest not yet. So I suggested an exercise for this. You don't have to do it if you understand how this works, but it is kind of nice to get a sense of typing the pipeline and having the data go through. On the other hand, this is also very contrived. So, who feels like doing this exercise and who just kind of wants to move on? Not sure. So I saw one move on. I saw one doing. All right. Cool.
What's the easy way to do the pipeline in a multi-line in the REPL?
So there isn't really an easy way, but the reason why this won't work typed this way in the REPL is because enter will evaluate. But if you put the pipeline at the end of the line and then press enter, Elixir will know more is coming.
Okay.
Sorry? Not as far as I know. But at this point, I'm used to it, so I have kind of typed a series of long pipelines in a single line in the REPL when I had to get something through a series of transformations, and I don't get phased by that.
Is it sort of good style to have the pipeline start at the same column as the source?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So I can't remember, was it up down 100 or down 100?
Sorry?
The Fizzbuzz implementation was up to 100 or down to 100?
Up to 100. Whatever you're typing, I want to see it in the channel when you're done. Sure, maybe, possibly, yeah. The yeah.
So just the ampersand function.
It's ampersand function and then slash the arity. Thank you for the link to railway-oriented programming. That is the same link I use to explain it to people. Yeah.
That guy's just, it's funny talks.
His like 270 slide talk on functional programming patterns is actually is amazing.
Yeah, it's really good.
You must require integer for
Where does integer come from? It's in the documentation, right? What is it then? Ah, that's interesting. Because it's not a function, it's a macro, that's why. So if you just type import integer just above that, you'll be fine. Yeah, that should be better. And then of course unused import, but yeah. Well, it's not outputting anything, right? But if you pipe it out to io.inspect, it'll print it out. No, wherever you want. IO is actually transparent, so it will return whatever you gave it. Lowercase, yeah. Just like that. I just heard muttering. I'm very curious. Thanks for the computer. Why the single line pipeline? What's wrong with you? So, all right, reverse, map it, and then print it. Sure. Why not? And then call with n is n empty list. And you have the accumulator. What are you doing to your code? I mean, okay, sure, but
I'm just playing with the syntax.
as well you are, yeah. That's, yeah.
Somehow I ended up in an infinite loop, and I'm not sure how.
Well, with a reminder, 15, 3, 1, call n minus 1. With just a number. Call. In theory, that should work.
That's what I thought. Oh, I've got double calls
You
too.
do have a double call.
Alright. That's from my older keyboard.
Sorry? That's not what I end up with. I end up with something. It's entirely possible I just wrote it incorrectly the first time too. It is not beyond me to just have written code wrong. Well, so the good news is removing everything was what I was going for. So that's what everybody else is getting. So clearly I did it wrong when I set up the exercise. But at this point that's not new to anyone, right? It must have been quite the beers.
You square one.
Yeah, you begin by removing all the odd numbers. Chautauqua State Park. I think we went up the Royal Arch. Definitely did not go all the way because I live at sea level. But it was good. It's nice. All right, we have 5 minutes left. Does anybody have a solution that they want to share into the channel? Does anybody have questions I just couldn't solve?
I guess, are we going to get into like testing frameworks at all in this? I was thinking a quick check would be really cool to say like for any list I can give this thing, it should always be.
Right. I'm not getting into them. You can find quick check implementations for Elixir pretty easily. There's at least 2 or 3 that I know of. Otherwise, the testing framework is XUnit. It comes built in with Elixir. People have implemented something called eSpec or something like that, which is a copy of RSpec, which I think is the worst bits of RSpec. But at this point, I've become biased against it. Well, I can talk about that after. But I prefer test unit, mini-test, all that stuff anyway. Because it's harder to write complicated things with those, so they're better. I've discovered that if you give a team of people the rope to hang themselves with, somebody's going to do it. And it'll be a team effort. I shouldn't say that. This is recorded. This will be on the internet. Oh, God. I didn't mean it, all my friends who write Ruby code and love RSpec. Thanks.
Is there a last argument pipeline?
There is not.